Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining in for this webinar. My name is Vipul, and I lead co-marketing for VWO. I'll be your moderator for today. For those who are hearing about VWO for the first time, VWO helps you identify leaks in your conversion funnel and provides tools to fix those leaks and keep your revenue growing. Today, we are joined by Daniel Gold, who is the head of research at House of Kaizen, a leading digital agency based out of London. We welcome you, Daniel. Before I let Daniel introduce himself and start with his part of the presentation, I request everyone to ask any questions they might have during the course of this presentation using the GoToWebinars questions panel. With that, Daniel, let's begin.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Vipul. My name is Daniel Gold. I now work for House of Kaizen digital marketing agency. So what we are doing is digital performance optimization, which means conversion rate optimization, usability, classic UX, customer retention, and user and customer insight. So what we're talking about today is how to actually leverage research to increase the success of a CRO program. And I'm going to start actually a little bit with the background why research is important for CRO. And then I'm going to give some tips and tricks how to actually get the maximum out of research when done for CRO purposes. And at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about the potential methods that you guys could be using to actually leverage research and start using it more intensively. And obviously, we have some takeaways at the end. So why is CRO research important? The first thing is, very honestly, that simple things can be easily learned with trial and error. The classic example is hammering in a nail. Well, you don't need a manual for this. You don't need research for this. You just try it a couple times. There's only one nail. There's only so many ways to actually try nailing it in. So if you try that 5 times, you will have found out how to hammer in a nail. Unfortunately, website and app optimization isn't actually that simple. And I'll give you an example here to show actually why there are too many elements, too many things you can change to actually do trial and error and just randomly try them out. So imagine you have a small website which has a total of 100 elements. So we're talking about sentences, images, icons, CTAs, everything together is 100. And what we know is that the typical user on such a site will see 20% of the content. So imagine now you want to randomly change the elements to modify which of these elements isn't the 20% that the typical user will see. That's a very, very simple optimization challenge. However, the number of variation you would have to test if you just do it randomly is 5e plus 20. So for those who are not familiar with this type of numbers, 4e plus 11, that's 11 zeros behind a 4. That's the number of stars in our Milky Way. So that's already 400 billion, so we add actually 9 zeros to that. So even with the most wonderful traffic, you will not be able to test that purely based on trial and error. The next thing that many people try when they optimize websites is intuition. They say, well, I have an intuition. I know roughly what our customers are most likely to want and what converts people. The problem is intuition actually doesn't work well for user interface optimization. The reason for this is that customers and marketers live essentially in their own world. Customers have an identity, they have a certain product knowledge, they have goals and attitudes, and they have a way how they make decisions and have cognitive resources available. Marketers, on the other hand, have the same things, but they're very different from the customer's world. And that makes it difficult to actually put ourselves in the shoes of the customer and tailor an experience to them. So I'll give you an actual example from a test which we ran, which was a usability test on a cruise website. So that's a website where people can book cruise ships and then I'll go on holiday with these. So what we found here is that novices, people who had never booked a cruise before, found this website very conservative and dull. They couldn't understand a lot of the terminologies that were used on the website, especially flight cruises, which I guess not even everyone here would know, are cruises that require you to fly to a port of departure. And they also didn't fully understand the concept of excursions because they had no idea that a cruise ship will always offer excursions at any port. The next thing is that they also struggle to actually see clear benefits of this type of holidays. And we measured here in this test also via a galvanic spin response, the actual stress levels, and they were very high. So that was a massive surprise for the marketers who designed the site, because they thought it's very appealing, clear, easy to understand, and full of USPs. The reason for this is that all these marketers were obviously experts on cruises. They are marketers who sell cruises. They know everything about their products. They have a very different idea of identity. So putting themselves in the shoes of these novice customers was very, very difficult. And this is where ultimately research had to be done to optimize this website. Another thing that we can put easily forward is actually our own experience as an agency. I worked 4.5 years for House of Kaizen now. And when I started in 2015 with the mission to actually tailor us and orientate us towards research in CRO, we had a much lower green test performance and a much lower average uplift per test. The increase between 2015, when we started really to take research serious, to last year is 65% more green tests, and that's a total right now of 83%, which is a very great number for the industry. And the average uplift per test has doubled to now 16%. And that's because we have started to take research very serious in the way how we do CRO. So what actually are the principles that make research successful? The first thing to keep in mind is that when you do your CRO process, research needs to be at the start of it. So you need to do ad hoc, which means tailored, specific, and small pieces of research which are really, really focused on an individual problem to actually fuel your test hypothesis. Then you will normally start with the framework. You do prioritization of your ideas. You do testing strategies. You will develop wireframes, blueprints, and designs and copyright. Ultimately, the test will be coded and developed and launched. But then in the end comes research again to actually analyze the test results and the performance much more in depth than just like knowing how the test performs based on conversion rates. So this is where you can additionally fuel research to get new hypotheses. And obviously you will do other ad hoc projects throughout your CRO program. So one of the key challenges, and you can imagine that challenge actually coming from this need that research fuels hypotheses, is to make research actionable. Classic research, I remember like 10 years ago, I used to work in market research. We would produce reports out and we wouldn't actually bother if there's any actions that clients could take for reports. This is something you can't do in performance marketing and especially CRO. So how can you ensure research is actionable? One very simple trick is to run joint test ideation workshops where your researchers, your CRO consultants, design teams, and if necessary also development teams come together and discuss the insights that come out of a piece of research. Typically, we spend between 1 and 2 hours on such a workshop that actually builds on a piece of research. And the advantage of this is that people can straight away jump into ideas and think about how could we test based on this research insight. The next thing is the planning of the research. It's very important when research is designed to keep in mind that everything needs to have an application, and you can already ask yourself, what if the research shows X, Y, Z? How would we test based on it? Can we actually make a test? Another trick is to use a lot of multi-method research where you combine behavioral and attitudinal methodologies. So you combine an insight about what users do, which is behaviors, with their thoughts and feelings, which are the attitudes that you reveal. And ultimately, and that comes in fourth element, is that you can actually merge your research with behavioral economics and user behavior theory so that it becomes more actionable. And I want to show an example of how actually this comes together. This is an eye tracking gaze plot. What you see here is that users start on the very dominant headline, they move to a brand logo in the top left thing, and the third thing they're seeing are these device images. So if you look at this piece of behavioral research, you might ask yourself, what does this pattern mean? Which actions are to take? And the answer would be no idea. So more needs to be added to the mix to actually make this actionable. So what we did here is we deployed consumer theory about the way how people orientate themselves when they come onto a new website or even in a physical room. They will first check, where am I? They want to find out some sort of an idea what is going on. And also among the first thing is they want to understand, what can I do somewhere? So here the order was actually, first was a check for what can I do here, which is called affordance. And obviously there's protection. This is an antivirus shop. Where am I? This is where the brand logo comes in. And the third thing, we actually needed to do even more research on the actual attitudes and a little bit go more subconscious with tests, association tests, to find out what is going on at the third stage. What actually is going on here is that people want to know if the software is compatible with their system and if the store matches to their personality, and they use this actually as a cue if the software will be difficult or easy to use or advanced or just very simple. And this ultimately now is something that happens in 5 seconds when people land on this masthead of this software shop. So now we're throwing even more theory in the mix. Behavioral economics teaches us that people have 2 decision-making systems. One is system 1, which is based on intuition. It's fast, emotional, and system 2 on the other side is about thought and reasoning, slow and rational. When we talk about 5 seconds on the page, as in this antivirus shop masthead, people cannot make a system 2 decision. Everything will happen fast, very subconsciously, and there will be just cues of, oh, I want to go forward or not. And a lot of bounce on pages happens like that. The trick now is that system 1 wants easy and quick accessible information. System 1 hates to dig in information and do in-depth reasoning, because this is system 2. What we ultimately did now in a redesign is to give system 1 all the information at once in a much easier way in the masthead. So one thing you can see is the word protect is now the start of the headline. You can directly see what you can do here, and the brand clue is also very simple and great accessible. But then we also added a personalization. Depending on the device the user comes with to the page, it will change the device that's written in the headline. So if you come on a Windows 10 computer, it will show you that you can protect Windows 10 computers here. And it will also change the image on the right, matching to the device you're on. And this ultimately means that now the compatibility is super easy accessible. And to address the lifestyle image, the lifestyle cue, we actually put a lifestyle image in the back, because this particular brand wasn't really for techies and geeky people. It was for very ordinary people who want to protect a family or have a nice home. So ultimately, this brought us 26% uplift in conversion rate, but you see what it was actually a lot of thrown in the mix, from having the eye tracking data to actually adding consumer theory, testing what happens in decision making, and then ultimately understanding we need to make this information very accessible. So I hope this example wasn't too much. And now when we discuss some theory research methods, I'll also give some much simpler examples. The first thing to understand is that research methods are normally divided in some sort of groups. One is attitudinal and behavioral, which is, okay, attitudes is about the thoughts and feelings of users, and behaviors is about the actions. The other divide is quantitative, qualitative, with quantitative data being numbers and qualitative stuff being unstructured data like images. And there's also the distinction between on-site, anything you do in an application that's actually happening there, versus off-site, for example, going with people into a laboratory and not actually touching the application. The most important way to classify methods, what we found out, is attitudinal and behavioral, because they do very different jobs. And it's very important to keep that in mind. So ultimately, you can't just have only behavioral or only attitudinal methods. You should at least have something of both. These are the research methods that we are actually using in the agency. I'm not going to go through all of these. You can Google some out if you find them interesting, or you might already have some. What I've tried here is to give actually some sort of an idea of what would be the minimum to run a successful CRO program with research. It's very clear that the minimum would be traffic analytics, which would be Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics or similar tools, a heat mapping tool, a session recording tool, pop-up surveys, and passive feedback. And I will talk a little bit about these now to show you better how they work and why they are very easy to use tools that can bring you very straight insights. So in the behavioral tools, traffic analytics is great to show conversion rates. A lot of test tracking happens with it as well. It can show you the path that people take in terms of the succession of pages visited to convert. And it can also show you exit rates. Where do people actually drop off? There are things, unfortunately, it can't do great. It's not great in tracking scrolling or clicks unless you do custom setups, which you can invest in, and then you have that. And the time on page for this tool, even though it's offered, is very unreliable. This goes back to the way how these tools work. They essentially fire information when you come on a web page. And when you go to another page, they fire again information into a database. What's happening now, if you leave the website, there's just no information coming in. The tool doesn't really know what happened. Are you still on the same page? Or are you actually now on a total different thing and closed your browser? That's why time on page is not very reliable. We can also not track hoovering. This is where heat mapping helps you a lot, because heat mapping really gets an idea of hoovering, mouse hoovering, and scrolling and clicks are out of the box accessible. You don't need a custom setup. Session recordings, on the other side, tell you much more about the order in which page elements collect engagements and the actual durations of engagements, because it can measure time on page very, very well. The problem is you work with much smaller samples on that than, for example, traffic analytics, where you can have all your data in your sample. So all of these tools have something they're good at and something they're a little bit less good at. And that's why having them all in the portfolio is quite important. So what could you, for example, do with these tools? I give you an example here for traffic analytics for a very simple test that was easy to do. So we looked in the behavioral flow with the GA stunning feature, and we found most conversions happens via a page that explains the trial of 100 days, which is a form of guarantee for this mattress. So if you buy the mattress, you can return over there in 100 days. Most conversions happen from the homepage into this trial page and then throughout the funnel. Whenever people did not go into this trial page, they actually dropped off and exited. That led to the hypothesis that if we actually drive more traffic through the trial page, we might simply increase conversion without adding any page or any sophisticated content. So in the end, what we did is we added small budgets here that mentioned the trial and made these budgets clickable to drive more traffic into the trial page. That brought 7.4% conversion on the thank you page for a very small and very easy thing, just basically adding two links on the homepage. So strengthening a path to conversion by putting more people through it is an option that is very easy to spot, for example, in such a tool. One example for heat mapping I brought here is lost clicks. Lost clicks is a classic heat mapping issue. It means people clicking on something that doesn't have a click action attached to it. These are lost clicks on a magazine shop, and the heat maps you see here are actually VWO heat maps. I know that very well because I extracted them in 2015. What you see here is a magazine cover, and we see actually clicks happening on the magazine cover and strong mouse movements on the magazine cover. So the hypothesis was built that people here want more content. They interact with the magazine cover because before they subscribe to this magazine, they actually want to see more content. And the solution then, what you see on the right, was to design a preview where you could actually scroll through a magazine in the digital format and by this get more familiarity with the content. That brought 10% conversion rate, but again, it's a quite simple research piece here, just looking at where do people click, where is no click action. The preview functionality is a little bit more complicated to do, but if you have the assets, it's not so difficult. And I want to mention something on pop-up service now going into the attitudinal research. Attitudinal research measures thoughts and feelings, so we're moving away now from behaviors. The great thing about pop-ups, as you see them on the right, which are small nudges where questions are transported, is that they are actually in the live environment where users are on the site. We're not taking users out to answer a large questionnaire. We're not taking participants that are not on the site. We're taking natural users. They're in the context of using the site, and we're asking them questions. And these questions can easily relate anything related to the experience on the site, like content gaps. They can also relate things prior to the visit, which is why did you actually come to the site? And they give more ideas of the needs and interests of users. This means this form of pop-ups are much more effective than, for example, simple passive feedback systems like, oh, please give me feedback on the site in a widget like is there, because they can target a specific question. The only thing you need is a certain amount of traffic, because typically response rates are 0.1 to 1%. Only on some pages, like thank you pages, can be much higher. Quickly, an example how we applied that. Here we did a pop-up on a newspaper editorial, so where people can read articles of an online newspaper. And we asked people, why do you want to read these articles? And we extracted here different ideas why they read the business pages. That's what they answered. And we found there's a lot of common themes about making informed decisions, be it private investments, be it in your company life. That ultimately then was used to actually combine it with a design principle and certain overlay here, what you see here on the right. And that drove people into the store to actually buy a subscription, which gives you access to even more content. So the pop-up here enabled us to put really the key why people want this product on the overlay, which is informed decisions. And you see it had a massive uplift. So summing up, why is research important? Research is important because trial and error doesn't work for websites. There's too many options. Intuition doesn't work well because you can never put yourself exactly in the shoes of your customers. Successful research needs to be actionable. That's the key challenge. You can do this especially by combining behavioral and attitudinal methods with consumer theory that helps you also to find the actions. There's a tremendous amount of research methods in attitudinal, behavioral, and a mix of both. We recommend that the minimum you use, the really minimum, is traffic analytics, heat mapping, session recordings, and pop-up surveys. Some of these tools are very easy accessible, like I know VWO, for example, has already heat maps and recordings, and the other tools can easily also be get the hands-on. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. That was really a wonderful presentation indeed. I was closely listening to the entire presentation, and those are quite really insightful examples that you've shared there.
Yeah, thank you very much. Do we have any questions?
Yes, of course. We'll start with the Q&A section. And the first question that I want to ask was that from all these research findings, is there a way, like how should a researcher go ahead and distribute the learnings from this research among the entire team?
Yeah, so certainly researchers these days will still write a report which is focused on insights also for documentary. But I really think this idea of joint workshops is very important, and also sharing knowledge. Because ultimately, as a researcher, you need to become familiar with the world of conversion optimization, with the world of testing strategy. And to get all these people together is a great way to actually turn research findings into tests.
Right, that makes sense. Another question is from Ivan. Ivan is asking, are there any key questions that you will always ask in your mini surveys?
Yes. So we actually, for us as an agency, compiled a library of just under 100 questions that are very valuable. And an easy way to find these questions is to think about the stages of the user journey. Obviously, on a landing page, you want to know what is the motivation of a user to come, what are the goals they want to achieve. If you go a little bit later into a product list page, you want to ask questions about, oh, can you select a product? Is all the information about a product available? Is something you want to know on a product page. And on the checkout, you might talk about friction or payment issues. And so ultimately, the stage of the user journey gives you a good idea what type of questions to ask.
Right. I hope you got the answer, Ivan. So another question that I had was, Right. So the another question that I had was, is research just a one person's task? Right. Is there like what role can other team members play to do an effective research?
Right. So research is not a one person task. For example, for us, we are an agency. Obviously, we help clients to work. We employ a whole team of researchers with different specializations and different things they're good at. Um, I think ultimately it's really important to think about methodologies and which are the methodologies that I need. If your website is in a very early stage, you do not need very advanced methodologies like biometrics. So we're talking about heart rate, galvanic skin response, eye tracking, um, brain techniques. You don't actually need any of that if your website is in a very early stage of optimization. But at some point, you will hit the point where you really want to go even further into research. I found when it's about sharing, I found design teams because many designers have some research training can also be utilized to do some sort of research. Some methodologies are very familiar in UX, like card sorting, for example, emphatic interviews, that's a classic UX technique, or customer journey mapping. So drawing in designers can certainly be something that gives you additional resources to make research.
Right. Yes, that makes sense. So a follow-up question to that was, and we see it, coming up with most of the businesses that we talk to, is that research isn't like a one-day task, right? So it takes a lot of time, and that is something that sort of takes the businesses like, they start feeling that hey, there might not be a real value in research. So what would you recommend to such businesses in order to, so that they can start doing the research and do it more effectively?
Well, first of all, I would not say that research necessarily takes a lot of time. It depends totally on the method. Mining
Hmm.
in your Google Analytics data is something you can do on a day, whereas conducting a survey obviously has more of a time attached because people need to respond, you need to get enough answers before you can analyze something. Ultimately, the trick is to start research very early and to research really having future tests in mind. So here we will do the research not for the test that goes live tomorrow. We do research for tests that go live in a month. And that's ultimately a preparation time that you need to give. And that's how research becomes most valuable. So it's more like an issue of planning rather than an issue that research takes a lot of time.
Right. Right. That really answers the question. And Jared McDonald has a question that is sort of a follow up to this, to your answer. Which type of research do your clients often find the most valuable?
Right. So the methods that are recommended, the 5 methods that you will see in the slide deck, these are methods that have a rather low cost and they have a very good effectiveness. Again, it depends really on the maturity on of your website or app, which research you need. And that also determines your research challenges. You don't need eye tracking, which is a very expensive method to do very basic optimizations of eye flow. But you need eye tracking if you already did a basic optimization and then you want to actually go a step further and make it even better. So ultimately, if you have these 5 basic methods, which are recommended, 3 behavioral, 2 attitudinal, you will already be able to do a lot of great things and get a lot of quick and good test results with that.
Right. So, Jared, yes, of course, I hope you got the answer. But of course, we'll be sending you the presentation deck after this webinar so that you can go through it once again and understand which research methods would be the most beneficial for your respective business. Sure. Another
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it depends really on the maturity of your optimization program. Are you more at the start of it or are you really developed and you want to boost it even further?
Right. So another question is sort of your opinion on what would be the priority order when you have to do a behavioral research versus an attitudinal research. What would you like to do first?
So, right. So this is like a chicken and the egg problem because both is very important. Um,
Right,
I must say that it depends also a little bit on your capabilities. Most people will have a form of analytics like Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics. And VWO as a platform, for example, already gives you heat maps and session recordings. So that means these things are very accessible and no one stops you from using it. Um, I still think all the five methodologies which I recommended, that's based on our agency experience, is something you should really have. Because a pop-up survey is also not so much effort and it doesn't need so much science than other methods. But mostly, obviously, getting your analytics sorted and using tools you already have is a very great way to start. Because if you already have the tool, why not use it more and get more insights out of it?
right, that makes sense. Right. So we just take two more questions, Daniel. So the first question
Yeah.
that we have uh, is there an average conversion rate increase that you generally see with tests for your client?
Yes, so I put this actually in the deck. Our last year's average across all clients was 16% per test, and the average number of green tests at around 80 something. And we run all tests to 95 or 99% significance, and for minimum 2 weeks. I just mentioned that you know that it's really robust results. Obviously, we work a lot with larger clients. We have the Wall Street Journal, for example, is a very large global publisher. It is a little bit different because for them, even smaller uplifts mean a lot of money. But if you achieve something around 8 to 16%, I would still say they're good, but 16% is certainly doable.
Right. So 16% would be a good number to look out for.
Yeah, that's what we achieved last year with 83% green test. So
Mhm.
obviously, if your website is very small and you're in the beginning, you will have much more uplift because you might only have like 100 customers, and adding 200 isn't so difficult. But for a large and higher traffic website, if you achieve something around 16%, you're certainly really good.
Okay. The last question for the day, Daniel, is when you base your CRO test on research, do you still sometimes see surprising results which go against your hypothesis?
Yes, absolutely. And this is also why research is important when analyzing tests, because you will still have red tests which do not perform. It doesn't happen so often anymore, but it still happens sometimes. And these tests are very often tests where something that you predicted to happen didn't happen, and that can relate back to research. The other way to get new results is obviously we are an agency. We work with clients from many industries, and every client has a little bit a different audience and different challenges. That means we also learn many, many new things, obviously, when we do research because every website has its own audience and its own particular challenges.
Right. So that was the last question for today, Daniel. Thank you so much for all the insightful answers as well.
Yes, and thank you very much to everyone for joining in, and I hope you found it useful and can go there and boost your Zero program. Thank you very much.
Sure. So that, guys, it's time to close this webinar now. Thank you so much for attending this session. I hope you learned something new today. Please fill in the survey that will turn up once this webinar is closed. Your feedback will help us a lot. Have a good day, everyone.